Hi everyone, it's Misty from the Jolly Fit Elf. Welcome back to episode 3 of my Stamping for Newbies series. We have touched on stamps, we've touched on paper, and now we're touching on ink because you can't stamp without ink. And as you can see, I have a plethora of different inks to walk you through and talk about. So let me get right in. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the Stampin' Up! Ink pads. This is a water-based dye ink. And it has a foam pad. Get it open here. And you basically just stamp using this ink. The great thing about Stampin' Up! Ink, not only is it that you can stamp images and get really crisp images, but you can also watercolor with this, etc. And this is a great ink. Of course, it comes with matching cardstock, etc. Now, it is a dye ink, and a dye ink does exactly what it says it does. It dyes the fibers of the paper, and that means that you are going to see some either bleeding or shadowing if you decide to use something like this in your planner, especially if you use a dark color. If you're stamping, you know, because you're creating a card or something like that, as long as you're using a good heavy cardstock, you shouldn't have any bleed or shadow. You may have a little bit shadowing with the darker colors, but you shouldn't have any bleed through. So again, a dye-based ink, it's great for watercoloring. It's great for getting, you know, a crisp image on a stamp. So the next kind we're going to talk about is also a dye-based ink, and this is Memento Tuxedo Black. Memento inks are a great ink, especially if you color with alcohol markers, especially Tuxedo Black. There's Rich Cocoa. They have all sorts of colors, but Memento is fade resistant, and for some reason, even though it's a water-based dye ink, it works well with alcohol markers. Same kind of setup. It has a felt pad. The Stampin' Up! Ink has a foam pad. You will get a crisp image with this. My only complaint about Memento is it's not a dark black. And if I'm gonna stamp in black, I want a dark black. But Memento is a great ink to have. Stampin' Up! Carries Memento Tuxedo Black, so you can pick up this in the refill from Stampin' Up! The next ink I want to talk about is StazOn, and StazOn is an alcohol ink. It's permanent, it's archival, it's a solvent ink, and that means you can stamp it on anything and it will stay. You can literally stamp it on tiles. If you've ever seen that project where people stamp on tiles to give us Christmas gifts, you can stamp on acetate, transparency paper, you can stamp on vellum, you can stamp on anything like that and it's going to stay. One thing to remember is that it will stain your stamps, and you do not want to use the StazOn cleaner with your stamps. You want to, especially photopolymer stamps, you want to just use a regular stamp cleaner. But this thing is awesome. It is great for if you're going to watercolor, anything that you need, like a permanent ink that's not going to smear, those kinds of things. StazOn is perfect. It does stink. StazOn has a weird smell. It comes with a protective coverant on it, and you want to make sure that you keep this on it so it helps keeps it juicy and from drying out. This is a must-have. You need to have StazOn. I know they have lots of colors, but I would definitely recommend getting the jet black and then a brown if you can pick it up. Stampin' Up! Carries this as well. The next kind of ink that is important is embossing ink, and you can pick up Versamark. I've also used the Distress embossing ink. Embossing ink is an interesting type of ink. It's like a pigment ink, but it is very, very, very sticky, and it is like that because mine is filthy, but it does the same thing. It's sticky, so you can put heat embossing powder on it, and it'll won't dry before you get an opportunity to do that, and then you just heat it with your heat tool. It's also can be used just for like a watermark ink. So if you want to, you know, stamp, let's say you have a piece of red cardstock and you want to get like a tone-on-tone effect, you could totally stamp in Versamark and it'll just look like it has a watermark on it. It'll look like it's, you know, tone-on-tone stamping. Out of the two, I prefer the Versamark. The Distress embossing ink is not bad. It's just really, 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 really juicy. And it kind of tends to be a little messy. But it comes in the mini one, so you could totally keep these if you're with your other Distress inks if you're using them. But if you think that you will ever want to heat emboss, you definitely want to pick up this ink. And we'll be talking about heat embossing in another video later down the road. So you can pick up the pad and the refill. Most ink pads come with refills. This is again from Stampin' Up. You can find it other places as well, but a definite must-have. If you don't get anything else, you definitely need StazOn, you definitely need Versamark, and you definitely need a good black ink. So there's those. The next one is pigment ink. Now, unlike dye ink, which soaks into the fibers of the paper and dyes the fibers of the paper, that's how dye inks work. Pigment ink sits on top of the paper, and you won't get any bleed through. You may have a little bit of shadowing if you use a dark color, especially on your planner, but pigment ink sits on top of the paper. It doesn't soak in, so it doesn't dye the fibers, and you're not going to get any bleed through. There are lots of pigment inks. A lot of people make pigment ink. Colorbox, VersaFine, there's Memento Luxe. I think almost every manufacturer of ink, minus Stampin' Up, makes pigment ink, and it's really, really awesome. You can emboss with it because it takes a little bit longer to dry. That's the main thing to remember about pigment ink. It takes a little bit longer to dry, so you're either going to want to hit it with your heat tool to dry it, or give it extra time to dry. But that way you don't smear it, whether you're working on a card project, scrapbook page, pocket scrapbooking, or stamping in your planner. So the two types of pigment ink I have this Colorbox petal, and this is great if you're going to be stamping in your planner, because they just pull out like this, and then you get this many colors. I picked this up at a local craft store, used a coupon. You can do that as well. My favorite black ink ever is the VersaFine Onyx Black. This is the perfect black. It is the perfect black. And again, it's a pigment ink. It's very opaque, so that means that, you know, it's definitely very black. You guys have seen me use this before plenty of times. Again, don't forget that number one, it takes a little bit longer to dry, so you want to make sure that it doesn't, you don't smear it, etc. You can either let it air dry on its own or hit it with a heat tool. So again, dye ink soaks into the fibers and dyes the fibers of the paper. Pigment ink or chalk ink, that's another popular one. I don't have any chalk ink, but chalk ink and pigment ink sits on top of the fibers, and so make sure you give it time to dry, and you shouldn't expect any bleed through, but you may have some shadowing on the darker colors. So the next type of ink is a hybrid ink. And this is my favorite things, black licorice. Hybrid is kind of the best of both pigment and dye. So what's great about hybrid ink is that you can watercolor with it, you can use your alcohol markers with it, and it gives you, you know, the crispness and the color quality of a pigment ink, but it's fast drying like a dye ink. I don't know that this necessarily, I haven't used this in my planner, so I don't know if this will bleed through, but I do know that it is, you can use it with like Copics, with Spectrum Noir, any kind of alcohol marker, Sharpies, etc. So this would be great if you wanted to stamp onto some labels for your planner and color them in, etc. So you could absolutely do that with this. If you are a card maker and you want to, you know, stamp an image in color, you could watercolor with this. You can use your alcohol markers, etc. So this is a great ink to have. I know My Favorite Things makes a hybrid ink. I think Hero Arts may make a hybrid ink, but I can't promise you on anybody else. But this black licorice one is really awesome. And the last type of ink I'm going to talk about is Distress ink. And this is from Ranger and Tim Holtz. And Distress ink is an interesting type of ink because it's one of the only ones that really reacts with water. And once you stamp with it, it's really not great to like stamp images with if you're looking for something crisp. Now, if you're layering stamps and you're not looking for a really crisp image, then this is fine. It's perfect. It's really great if you're going to be using it for backgrounds, you know, those kinds of things, collages, those kinds of things. It works well with, it reacts with water. So if you know, drop water droplets on it, I've seen a lot of people watercolor with it. I think I've watercolored with it once or twice. It's just amazing how it reacts with water, but you're not going to get a crisp image like for sentiment, etc. if you decide to stamp with it. You can, but it's just not going to be crisp and clean looking. But these are fantastic. He now has them in the small cubes, and he's releasing a new color every month this year. The new colors are fantastic. I've sold, I think I have two big ones left, and I haven't picked up any of the new ones. And that's because I don't do a lot of inking that way. Like, I don't make tags, I don't do collages, I don't art journal. Those are great uses for these distressed inks. And I know a lot of people do some amazing things with them, but if I watercolor, etc., I tend to use either my Twinkling H2Os or just my Stampin' Up! Stamp pads. But definitely, if that's something that you're interested in, you can search on YouTube and find hundreds upon hundreds of videos talking about and using distress inks. So again, we're going to start with dye inks. Dye inks sink into the paper, dye the fibers. If you're a planner person, you will have bleed through. You may have some shadow. You can stamp off, which means you stamp it once on a scrap sheet of paper before going to your planner, and that may alleviate that. If you're a card maker, these are perfect. You don't have to worry about it, especially if you're using a quality cardstock. StazOn, again, is an alcohol-based ink. It's a solvent ink, which means you can basically stamp on anything and you're going to be fine. If you're going to use photopolymer stamps, make sure that you don't use the StazOn cleaner with it because it will damage your stamps. Pigment inks, and on top of the paper, you're not going to get a lot of bleed through. You may get some shadowing, but these are perfect if you're going to stamp in your planner, and they're fantastic if you're just making cards, etc. Remember that it takes longer to dry, so you're going to want to hit it with your heat tool, or you're going to want to let it air dry. Embossing ink, perfect for making tone-on-tone cards, stamping, etc. Or if you want to heat emboss. And again, if you're new to this and you're like, what's a heat tool and what's embossing? I'm going to get into that soon, I promise. Hybrid ink, perfect if you want to use, you know, watercolor, if you just want to stamp with it, or if you want to use your alcohol markers with it. It's perfect ink. And then finally, Distress reacts with water. It's great for those of you that do like art journaling, if you want to use it to create backgrounds, those kinds of things. So yeah, so I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the description box below. If you are like, okay, what ink do I need to get? You need to get StazOn if you're going to be stamping on other things. If you think you want to do other crafts, StazOn is magical, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff with this one pad of ink. I would also suggest an embossing ink. Great. You can pick up the Stampin' Up! Inks if you want to get some colored inks, or pick up a Memento or a hybrid ink if you're going to be coloring with alcohol markers. So yeah, that's basically it. These are fantastic. Inking is fun. You guys have probably seen some videos with me where I have ink all over me. So you don't have to invest into a lot, but start with a few basics and go from there. So if you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments down below. I would be glad to answer anything that you may have. If you're enjoying the series, please let me know. If you're new to crafting and this is helping, make sure you leave me a comment and let me know that this is working for you. And like always, make sure you follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time where we're going to talk about cutting and scoring tools. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.